pessimists are usually right and optimists are usually rich. To be successful in life, you have to be almost delusionally optimistic that things are just going to work out.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Casazza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with the SEAL. Today's guest is a former SEAL. I met him through his incredible podcast, Harder, Not Smarter. I had his co-host, Greg, on the show, if you guys remember. This guy was a Marine. He was in the SEAL teams. Today, he runs HMS Media and the Vet Collective, empowering veterans to find meaning and success beyond the uniform. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so excited to introduce you to Kevin Seiff. Kevin, thank you so much for being on the show.
No worries. Appreciate you having me on here. It's great having you on ours. So happy to reciprocate. Love chatting with you.
I had a great time talking with you on your podcast, though I did all the talking. And I want to now throw the ball into your court. And I want you to do all the talking on this show because I have so many questions for you. First of all, the Marine to SEAL intrigues me mainly because Marines are just built differently than everybody else, which is interesting. And you look like you would be a SEAL and Marine. Like you just have that, like when you look at like someone like Jocko, you're like, I can see it. Like that's the SEAL, whereas like some other ones you don't, you're like, oh, but you, I see it. You're like the G.I. Joe action figure.
Too kind.
So you discovered you wanted to be a SEAL at 12 years old. You wanted to go into the Navy. You had this dream. What sparked that? And what did you do to put that dream into fruition? Like what actions did you take?
So I guess the stuff that I did, being 12 to 18 years old, you don't have a huge toolbox of named methods and mindset skills. You just you are who you are. You've learned things from your parents. You have your own personality and just how you've gone through life. I've always been one that when I put my mind towards getting something, I just get latched onto it. And it becomes, I don't want to say it's an obsession. I'm not at that level of trying to get something, but it becomes a goal that I'm constantly focused on. Aside from just having a glutton for punishment, I've always been an athlete. I did water polo, soccer, and swimming. So 3 grueling sports that you just get comfortable being uncomfortable. You're constantly tired. You're out of breath. You're trying to push yourself against everyone else in the pool or on the field. The mindset, I want to go find things that give me that same level of satisfaction. When I found out about the SEALs, it naturally aligned with everything else I was trying to do. My cousin's friend at the time was a SEAL, and I heard about all the things he got to do, all the cool gear, all the cool experiences. And at that age, you're super impressionable. I'm like, this guy seems great. How do I do that? And then you just never find anything better along the way. Like you have job fairs and you have counselors in school, and they're like, what do you want to do? And nothing else really sounded all that exciting. And so I really latched on to that idea of being a SEAL. I'm sure a lot of it was romanticized. You build it up, the mystique in your head. Outside of actually seeing them operate, you just see movies, you hear stories. And so a lot of it's secondhand, thirdhand information. But it just became something that I really wanted to do. But I honestly had very little knowledge about going into the SEALs, going into the military, the distinction between different stuff in the military. So I didn't understand the difference between officer and enlisted. I thought it was just another role within the community. I heard about the Naval Academy. My uncle had gone there. He served on submarines, but for me, it was, they pay you to go to school and then you get to join the Navy, and the Navy has the SEALs. So why wouldn't I go that route? And I actually didn't get into the Naval Academy on my first try. Frequently been someone that puts all my eggs in one basket, whether for good or bad. I think I applied to 2 or 3 colleges with just the plan, I'll just get into the Naval Academy. And then I didn't get in. What's plan B now? But fortunately, I had enough connections with people. They introduced me to a program that helps prepare people who didn't get into the academies on their first try. I went through their program and fortunately got in on my second attempt to the academy. And then while at the academy, And my story is continuous second and third tries. Like it's not working out first try, keep doing it again.
Let me ask you though, because what you just said, like, was that as a child too, or was it like as a child? I don't know. I'm just assuming by your looks, like you're a star athlete or something like that. And you didn't experience failure until then, or did you experience failure and hardship
I failed
growing?
and had setbacks constantly. School was not my strong suit. As you mentioned, athlete or athletics were a big part of my life. Putting me in a chair and telling me to sit and listen quietly in a classroom and then go home and do homework 4 hours, it's not my cup of tea, especially at that age. So I wasn't a bad student by any means. I wanted to do well, but it was just so hard for me to sit down and focus. I wasn't a quick reader. So, you try and do history homework and then English homework and then science homework. And you're just like, I'm just spending all my time reading and it's 10 o'clock at night. Forget it. I'm just not going to do the rest of the homework. I would get C's and B's, occasional A. But yeah, I was by no means a stellar student. I performed well in athletics, but I didn't have some crazy genetic gift. I think I graduated high school at 145, 155 pounds. Like it wasn't anything substantial. For reference, I'm like 190 now. I wasn't huge. I was 5'8", 5'9", I think, when I graduated high school. So not some physical specimen, but I had some good talent. I picked things up quickly and I had a very competitive nature to me. Jumping ahead a little bit, one of the things people ask me who makes it through buds and who doesn't. I honestly think it's people like myself who were athletic and competitive, but they weren't necessarily the star athlete with all the natural gifts and talents, because those people that constantly experience success after success after success without having to work exceptionally hard and they don't experience failure, everyone fails at butts, regardless. Everyone fails in the military. They're very good at putting you in situations where you're not going to succeed or you're going to struggle substantially. And so the guys that show up to these top tier communities who have never failed before and they experience failure for the first time, they're the ones that ultimately quit because they just don't know how to move forward from not being the best, from not being first, from experiencing failure. I think failure for me was just part of who I was. I dealt with it all the time and I moved on. I didn't dwell on it.
So how did you develop that tenacity to keep on going? Was it something that you just built in you, or I'm just like, I'm gonna just keep going and going? Was there ever a time where I recently said this on the show where like I had a friend that was like never experienced failure until their late 20s. And then when they experienced failure, it was like immobilized, like couldn't go back, couldn't move forward,
Mm-hmm.
So for yourself, like, how did you get that drive? I mean, especially as a kid and stuff, like to move forward. Because how does it feel for someone like you? Like, I'm very similar to you, and I put all my eggs in one basket, and I have this delusional confidence that it's all going to work out, And if it doesn't, I just keep that delusion
Well, you know what
and
they say
keep
that
going.
pessimists are usually right and optimists are usually rich. I mean, to be successful in life, you have to be almost delusionally optimistic that
Mhm.
things are just going to work out. My friends compare me a lot. Do you ever watch the TV show Archer?
Yes. Yeah.
They like you have the same personality as Archer. Like shit is just going to work out for you, and you go through life thinking stuff is just going to work out because it ultimately does.
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to making your own luck in some regard. Naval talks about it a bunch, the different types of luck. If you go through life with that victimhood mindset of everything goes against me, everyone's out against me, things never work out, I'm never going to get this done, the world's out to get me, then yeah, those types of things are going to come to fruition. If you have the mindset of, we used to say it all the times in the SEAL teams, that'll buff out. You work through it. You don't need to have a perfect plan. If you're just continuously moving forward and always scanning, trying to find new options, you'll inevitably be able to find an option. Not all options are going to be great, but you're like, okay, this is an option. I can keep moving forward. It doesn't halt me completely. I'm not dead. I can get up. I can keep fighting another day. This is an obstacle that I'm to get around. But it's just something else that I need to do. You don't have to be completely debilitated just because something didn't go as originally planned.
Now, when you didn't get into the Naval Academy, right? And you mentioned earlier that a lot of things, like it took 2 or 3 times, right, to get to where you wanted to be, right? But you ended up going to the Marines and doing almost 4 years, and you applied twice
Yeah,
to
so I
the
can just
Corps.
Tarantino the whole story right here.
Yeah.
Didn't get into the Naval Academy first time, got in second time. From the Naval Academy, didn't get SEALs. It was just super competitive that year. Fortunately, I went Marine Corps instead of going on a ship. I had a bunch of friends that went surface warfare. They served on a ship. They actually got to buds faster, but they basically said their entire time on a ship didn't translate over to anything useful in the SEAL community. So I went Marines, applied from the Marines to both MARSOC and the SEALs. I was like, I'm just gonna hedge my bets, see which one works out. The Marine or the MARSOC at the time had a huge backlog because it opened it up to all MOSs, all different specialties in the military. It used to be you had to have a combat arms MOS, so like infantry, tanks, artillery, something like that. You couldn't be a logistician or a supply officer or a supply person or a comms person. But then around 2009, they opened it up to everybody. So I applied to MARSOC and I applied to the SEALs. MARSOC was just a super long wait list. I didn't get SEALs the first time. Then I applied again and got it that round. From Buds, my first hell week, I got SIPE. I was coughing up blood. It's a great condition. SIPE is swimmer-induced pulmonary edema.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got rolled back halfway through my first hell week and had to do all of first phase over again. And then I made it through. So it's just like my life has been perpetually those. It honestly was harder for me to get to Buds than it was for me to get through Buds. It took me, let's just say, from getting out of the Naval Academy, it took me 4 years. But if you look at everything, from when I was 12 years old to when I actually showed up at Buds at 27, it was 15 years of me being focused on this is where I want to be. I just had that long-term vision of this is where I'm going to go. There's detours along the way. I went to the Naval Academy. That's 4 years. There was times I was there that I thought about, should I just leave the Naval Academy and go enlist right away, get to the fight? You're seeing so from 2004 to 2008, there was some serious fighting going on in both Afghanistan and Iraq. I'm like, am I making the right decision being here? 4 more years as a Marine, not being a SEAL or not being in special operations. And so it really just comes down to having that resilient mindset of I'm not where I want to be yet, but how do I keep making progress in some general direction towards where I want to be?
Did you have moments of doubt?
Oh, for sure. During Buds, before Buds.
How do you get through like those moments of doubts of like, especially when things are out of your control? Like, you apply and you hope you get it, right? But then you don't, and you don't, and now you're 4 years into something else. So what do you specifically do to get out of those moments of doubt so you don't spiral into a victim mindset?
I think the best way is to just enjoy the journey for what it is. I read recently, I think it was Sahil Bloom talking about it, the difference between goals and missions in life. Goals are something you can accomplish and then you're on to the next thing. Where a mission is something that you're perpetually doing. It's an infinite game. There is no accomplishing your mission in life. It's something you're always working towards. So it's more broad and vague than a goal, but all your goals should nest inside of your mission. And so I just had it as my mission in life is to do challenging things, push myself, live an abnormal but enjoyable life. And all these things tie into it. Joining the military during a multi-war era of our nation's history, joining the Marines, they're an intense fighting unit in and of itself. Mm. Joining the SEAL teams, getting into entrepreneurship, like everything is in line with what I find enjoyable in life. So I don't feel like I'm languishing, I guess you can say. I'm always doing something that is meaningful and purposeful for me. Even if it's not the ultimate spot I want to be, I'm just always working towards that next ridge line.
So did quitting ever cross your mind when you were in Buds?
Yes, but not in the sense of like, I'm going to walk over and do that. This is really painful right now. this is challenging. But I had similar feelings during workouts. Like I was big into CrossFit for a while, and I'd have the same sensation during some of the workouts. Like, I could just stop. I don't really need to be doing this, but I'm just gonna do another rep, and then I'm gonna do another rep, or I'm gonna do another step. And it's just one of those things that kind of it's fleeting.
Mhm.
You let it happen in your mind. Like, man, I could stop right now. I would stop and feel much better than continue going. But then you just ignore and you do one more. Like, especially when you're under the boat in buds. And if I step out of it now, there's that much more weight that's going to everybody else on the boat. If I try slowing down, then it's going to mess up everyone's rhythm and the boat gets punished. And so you're just like, yeah, quitting would be nice. And then you keep going. You just kind of let it. It's meditation. You let the
Right.
thought happen, and then you watch it go away. I think the best description I've heard of meditation is having a bubble form underwater. You watch it, and then it floats away.
Mhm.
And I think quitting for me is that same thing. The bubble form, you float up. You're like, that's cool, and then you go on to the next thought.
First of all, when was your first hell week? Were you winter, summer? What were you?
My first one was summer, I believe. I think it was
Summer.
July.
And
Yeah, I
then your
think it was
second
July,
one?
and the second one was end of October. I remember we were talking about wearing Halloween costumes or something.
So the first time, you coughing up blood and everything, what point, first of all, what was it like Monday or Tuesday that
It
you
was
ended up?
Tuesday night. So Hell Week starts Sunday night, Tuesday evening that I got pulled out of class. And you're already kind of delirious at that point because like you're about 48 hours in. You hadn't slept at all. I think we had our first med check Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday's med checks. And so we'd had our first med check. It's a big milestone to get there. I was running along and I coughed and there's a bunch of phlegm came out of my mouth and I spit. I think we were under the boat or something. And it was just bright red. Shoot. I was like,
Cool.
and everyone talks about the different injuries that are common among students, and Seipp is one of them. It's typically more common in winter hell weeks, but they really have no idea how or why we get it. The only groups of people that they really see coming down with this issue is bud students and some triathletes, but they don't know what exact conditions cause it. They think it has something to do with stress, cold, being in moisture, and then maybe being in the prone position, like while swimming. That's why they call it swimmer induced. They couldn't tell you why one student gets it at one time and one student doesn't. Like I got it in the summer and then I went again in the fall when it was colder and I was fine.
Mhm.
And I remember a guy, he was finishing his third hell week when I had just showed up, but he had gotten Seipp his first time on Monday night, his second time on Tuesday night, and his third time on Wednesday night. And on the Wednesday one, he was just like, I'm just keeping it to myself. I'm close enough. And he was able to push through. But he got it all
Yeah,
three
because if you
classes.
go Wednesday, if you would have made it to Wednesday, you would have rolled, right?
Maybe. That's a general rule of thumb.
Mhm.
Wednesday's pretty iffy. Thursday, you're usually good. But it really depends on how you've been performing, how the instructors think about you, and some other factors. I'm sure they have a hard cutoff in their own criteria that says no students will be rolled forward until they hit this point, and then they have a
Mhm.
gray area where they have instructor discretion. But yeah, typically the goal is get to Wednesday and you can kind of make it through. But you also don't want to be the guy that makes it to Wednesday and then you get rolled forward
Yeah.
where other people are doing another 48 hours, which is basically half of Hell Week. So no one wants to be that guy that's like, yeah, I
Yeah.
made it for 3 days.
Yeah. How did it feel, knowing like I had to go through that again? Because how was it like the
No,
first
it's
time
super
for you?
demoralizing.
Yeah.
My girlfriend at the time, I had her repeat to me several times after I got rolled, you're not in that class anymore. You're not in that class anymore. Like, stop trying to think what if and just focus on what's in front of you. It goes back to that stoicism idea of control what or only worry about what you can control. It was out of my control that I wasn't in that class anymore. You're allowed to miss 4 hours of training, and I was in medical for 4 hours. They're trying to heal me up. I forget it's basically an inhaler type thing. They're having me breathe through those, trying to clear the fluid out of my lungs. Tried warming me up to have my system flush it out. But every time they put me on a bike with the finger thing that does your pulse and your blood oxygen concentration, you're typically around 98, 99% oxygen saturation. If you drop below 90%, it's getting dangerous. I was getting on the bike and it would go from 98 and plummet down to about 81%, like
Wow.
just like that. And so like we can't send you out until you stay in the 90s. And after 4 hours, like, sorry, you hit a threshold. We have to roll you out now. So that was a weird conversation because I went back to the area where the students who quit, they have you go back to the holding classroom. They have cots and everything. And so I'm in there and it's a weird feeling because everyone else in there had quit. I don't think there was any other med roles. I'm sleeping. And then the next morning, I called my roommate who was a class behind me and asked him to come pick me up. He's like, did you quit? I was like, no, I got rolled, but I don't really want to talk about it right now. Can you just come grab me? It took a lot of processing because in my head, I had just finished the last log PT. So you have one log PT every week for the 4 weeks of first phase. And then there's, I think, three or four log PTs during Hell Week. And those are some of the worst, most grueling evolutions. And we had just finished our last one. It's like, yes, I'm beyond log PT because second and third phase, they usually don't have to do that punishment. And then I was thinking to myself, fuck, I have to do all 7 of them again.
Wow.
So
So that's that's pretty brutal. That how did you get over and how long did it take you to get over that demoralizing feeling?
once I classed up again, and I got rolled on Wednesday, and there's typically a week gap between when Hell Week ends and when the next class starts. So Hell Week will end on Friday. It'll usually be, was it 10 days? The next Monday would be the next class. So there's a little bit of a gap. For whatever reason with the scheduling, the next class was starting that Monday. So like 5 days later. And when I checked back into, I forget what it was called, but basically like the holding unit for students who are waiting to class up, I talked to the officer in charge and I'm like, when's the next class I can get into? I'm like, well, there's room in the one on Monday. I'm like, put me in it. Are you sure? 'Cause, I just got rolled out of a class. I just spent 7 weeks, 7 weeks, yeah, 7 weeks up to that point of first phase. He's like, you sure you don't want to take a break and rest? I'm like, no, just get me in the next class. I don't want to wait 2 more months, essentially sitting in purgatory, waiting to class up again. Like just put me in the next one. I'll figure it out. And that was probably the best thing for me to just have something else to focus on and not be dwelling on, watching my previous class progress even farther. As it was when I was going through my next first phase, I was watching my previous class go on to second phase. And so first phase, you have the green helmets, second phase, you have the blue, and third phase, you have the red. You don't see much of third phase because they're off on the island, but first and second phase, they see each other all the time. And so seeing my previous class run around with their blue hats or helmets going to all the pool comp stuff, it's like, this is rough. So having them being even farther in front of me would have been worse. I was like, just get me in a class and I can start working through the stuff. I can heal up along the way, but I'd rather be making progress than stagnating.
How was buds for you coming in as a Marine? Did you find it challenging? Did you find it like, I don't want to say easier, but did you think that was it easier having that background, or was it more challenging?
I think I had a few things that are really going towards me. First, I was 27. So I was on the higher end of the guys in the class. There was a couple 18-year-olds there, they had very little life experience. They had all the energy and all the testosterone in the world to get them through stuff, but they're much more impressionable and the emotional swings to go along with it because they get much more invested. They hadn't really seen what the military was and how it operates in terms of everything's a bit of a game. All these training pipelines, they're not trying to kill you. This isn't actual combat. They're trying to simulate stress of combat through physical pain, sleep deprivation, sometimes nutritional deprivation, and just chaotic stress. The ultimate goal is to break you down and build you up and incorporate you into the community. And so if you're going into it understanding what the military is trying to accomplish, it changes your mindset a lot of allowing your emotions to get the best of you. I'm sure there's times when I was tired and frustrated that emotions flare up, but you can keep it much more controlled. So having 4 years at the academy, 4 years in the Marine Corps, showing up with essentially 9 years or 8 years at this point of experience being in the military in some fashion helps a ton. Being a little bit older, more mature helps a ton. Having some of my classmates from the Naval Academy that all went SEALs, they were 4 years ahead of me. So I'm hearing from guys that anywhere from 1 to 4 years ahead of me, hearing how Buds was for them. And when you pull back the curtain a little bit on the mystique of Buds and you hear about some of the stuff you do, experiences they had, when it happens to you, you're like, oh yeah, I heard about this. And so it's much less daunting. So going into it, I was much more comfortable than the average guy that had just shown up off the streets and was starting training.
You talked about emotions and how, like, an 18-year-old, like, they allow their emotions sometimes to get the better of them. They haven't to that maturity of controlling their emotions. Took me like most of my 20s. I felt
Yep.
like I belonged in like an institution on how erratic sometimes my emotions got, and until like my later 20s where I was like finally like level-headed. So when did you and what did you do like to learn how to control, and what do you do for yourself like to control your emotions, to not react and let your emotions get the better of you?
Unfortunately, I think that's a little bit of nature versus nurture. How much of that is learned behavior versus it's just who I am as a person. I've always been very level-headed, whether that's because of how my parents raised me or if that's just who I am. You obviously can learn it. There's breathing techniques and there's just being self-aware and recognizing, oh, I'm acting out right now. I'm letting my emotions get the best of me. If you're self-aware, well, I guess the first step is become self-aware.
Mm.
Understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. Are you doing it because it's actually helpful, or are you doing it because it's making you feel better, or that you're getting attention from it? If you're able to recognize that my actions right now aren't benefiting the group, maybe I should change what I'm doing. That'd be the first step. And then once you recognize it, then you can work through, breathing techniques and just recognizing things. Okay, I hate this word, but I'm going to use it because I can't think of anything better. This triggers me. So maybe I just become aware that when this type of thing happens, I need to be more cognizant of what I'm doing. But I think the best way people can control their emotions is just being aware of how they react in certain situations, or seeing, is that how you actually want to be seen by others? Is this how I want others to think of me? Is this how I want to present myself? It's incredibly difficult, but once you start picking up on these cues, I think it becomes much easier to recognize and change habits.
When you were going through Buds, did you have any struggles throughout
I hate running.
it?
Like I despise running with a passion. Which I'm thinking, well, I had to join the military. So there's two types of Buds experiences. There's those who are good runners, and then there's everybody else. Um, because this is just a lot of running. When you're running under the boat, you're doing conditioning runs, you're doing timed run evolutions. You have 4 mile timed runs you have to do. Everywhere you go, you're running as a class. I mean, it's running. It's funny when you're in class, you feel like you're sprinting everywhere. But so if you drive through Coronado, you can oftentimes see the classes going through there. It is the slowest shuffle pace ever, but you're just so broken down and tired that it feels like you're sprinting everywhere. The Buds compound is on the ocean side of Coronado Island. So that the base gets split by, I always forget what highway it is, 75 maybe. There's a 4-lane highway that goes down the strand. And on the ocean side is Buds, and it has all the SEAL teams. And on the bay side is the rest of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, which has like the SWIC guys and all the logistics and supplies. There's a whole other side of the base over there. And that's also where the galley is, where we go for food, the cafeteria. And so we're constantly going back and forth across that highway. And so you're just running everywhere. It's about a mile from Bud's compound to the galley. And so you're just running everywhere. Being a good runner helps. I was not. I was a swimmer. I was a water polo player. I played soccer, but I wasn't the fastest guy. I wasn't some exceptional player. And then in college, I didn't play soccer at all. And so I was a decent runner, but I was nowhere near a fast runner. And so to give you an idea, I failed 2 4 mile timed runs by a collective 3 seconds. One was 2 seconds, one was 1 second. And so I was always on that cusp of, am I going to pass this run? In every phase, the times get faster and faster. Conditioning runs, my first class, I was constantly in the goon squad, meaning I didn't keep up with the main group. And so they have a cutoff point where if you weren't with that instructor or in front, then you get diverted off and you get extra punishment. My first class, I was constantly in the goon squad. It was utterly miserable. So the second one, I learned how to, if I needed to, just do a put out sprint as I think we're getting to a checkpoint and you just haul ass to get up there. But yeah, running was constantly a struggle for me. And I was always jealous of the guys that, like, there was one guy in my class, he ran a 5:30 pace mile in boots and utes on the sand.
Wow,
He
on the
finishes he
sand.
finishes 4 miles in like 22 minutes.
Oh my
The
God.
cutoff time at the start was 32 minutes. Meanwhile, Kevin's coming in at like 31:30 for the first group. You see this, like, fuck, how do I keep up with these guys? Lo and behold, that guy ended up quitting.
Wow.
Because I mean, he was just a phenomenal athlete, and he didn't have that foresight of being able to have that long-term vision. That was a weird story, actually. He came up to me. I was the OIC at the time, officer in charge, and we were about to do the O course, the obstacle course. And he comes up to me, he's like, "Hey, sir, just want to let you know I'm going to quit. Remind you, this guy was just crushing everything. He would finish his runs in incredible times. He was a good swimmer. He kept up." I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, I just don't think I have it in me to be a SEAL. I'm telling you this now. I really like the O course. So I'm going to do the O course now, but I'm going to quit as soon as I finish." And that's what he did. He was in the top 10 people on the O course. He finished it in great time, ran on over to the back of the truck where they had the bell, rang it, and that was the last I saw him. So
Wow.
it just goes to show that the people that you think will be SEALs aren't always the ones that make it.
Wow. So I absolutely despise running too. And
That's terrible.
running,
Running's for cowards.
it's the worst. And when I was at Team Eagle One, it was my first time running on soft sand. For yourself, did you train running on soft sand? I mean, it's a totally different beast
It
running on
sucks.
soft sand. So did you, especially like coming from the Marines and stuff, were you training and doing that before, or you just kind of decided to wing
No.
it?
I mean, I did some, but it's one of those things that running in sand, no one's ever good at it. And every evolution is a little different. So the 4 mile time runs are almost always first thing in the morning. It's like a 5:30 evolution. 5:30 doesn't care what tide it is. So some days you would have a low tide where you just have this massive beach with the nice packed sand and you have
Yeah.
all this running room to go. And then there's days where you show up and it's high tide. There was a storm over the weekend. There's literally knee deep kelp for about a quarter mile of it. And they're like, doesn't matter. Time's the time. Go. And you just have to figure out. So you're running higher up in the soft sand. You're having to run through this kelp or run way out of the way to get around it. It just sucks. The conditions are always different. So some days you don't have to run in soft sand. Some days you do. I don't think anyone's ever really good at it. It's just whether or not you have the cardio and the mindset to push through the pain is really all that matters. There's only so much technique you can actually have with running in soft sand.
You said something really interesting in the beginning. You said when you go to buds, like, or in the military in general, like they set you up for failure.
Oh yeah.
So do you have a story where you were set up for failure and you knew, or you knew after, like you knew like this is like I'm set up for failure? And how do you, if you know prior, like still do your best to, when you're set up for failure, you sometimes would be like, I'm not even going to try. Were there times where you like were set up for failure where you knew, or you have a story where you were set up for failure, and like what emotionally was going on, and how do you push through something like that?
So this was a story beyond buds. It's during SQT, SEAL qualification training. So buds, you learn basically zero modern tactics. It's just, can you put out, can you learn new skills, and can you learn the fundamentals of of combat that you do a little bit of during the third phase. Everything in Buds is basically Vietnam era stuff, and it's really
Mhm.
not too applicable in the modern day. So after you finish Buds, you go on to SEAL qualification training, and that's actually where you earn your trident. You don't get your trident after Buds. And one of the evolutions where you're going through these mock operations, we didn't know it at the time, but the evolution was called the go no go criteria. So when you're doing a mission, one of the areas in there is go no go criteria, meaning if any of these are not met, or if some of these things aren't available that you thought would be, you're going to cancel the mission. It's meant to take the emotional decision out of it. Like these things, for example, if we lose air assets overhead, we're canceling the mission because we no longer have support if we get into a firefight. We didn't know that they were working on that with us. And so we're going through the normal mission planning stuff, and we have our go no go criteria. And then they just start injecting little things like, hey, you lost your QRF, your quick response force. All right, noted. Still go forward. We lost these assets. Intel has changed on this little thing. And they keep injecting these changes into the mission, waiting to see when you'll actually cancel the mission, waiting to see if you recognize that you're no longer on the advantage, that you're actually becoming much more vulnerable to the environment. Some groups will go the whole time, and then they'll have to do a massive debrief after, like, hey, you said your go no go criteria was this. You lost it at this point. Why did you keep going? And some classes recognize right away that the situation's changed, and so they cancel. But you're at the time, you've just been constantly doing op after op after op after op. And so you're just in that mindset of, oh, we just push through it. We just keep going. And so it's a huge shift in mindset that they're trying to drive into you, that even though you're this badass fighting force that is world renowned and you have all these skills and all these assets and you have all this training, there hits a point where you need to recognize that you're not, first off, you don't ever want to get into a fair fight. That's rule number one in the military. If it's a fair fight, it's a losing fight. You always want to have the advantage. And so if you're going into something where you've lost the advantage, you need to seriously reconsider, is this mission worth the extra risk that you've just taken on? That right there is a prime example of them forcing failure on you. That they want to see that you can recognize you're in a losing position and reassess.
How were you at this? Were you like, I'm going all the way? Were you at some point you canceled it?
We started the op and we were doing our foot movement in, and we again kept getting little injections. They started saying, hey, chatter, we're hearing enemy chatter doing this. We lost this air asset. And at some point, I wasn't the platoon leader on this one, so I didn't have the say, but there's talk amongst us of, hey, we don't have these things anymore. Should we keep going? And we finally did call it partway through. Ideally, we wouldn't have even started the up. We got a C plus. Wasn't terrible, wasn't great. But it's one of those, it was a huge learning experience for us. We're like, oh, we don't need to just put our head down and go through the wall, kind of like what we talked about, or with the naming of our podcast, Harder, Not Smarter. There's times where you put your head down and you go through that brick wall. And then there's times where you need to reassess what you're doing and see if what you're doing is the best choice.
That's a good segue to your business now and being an entrepreneur, because at what point do you pivot and you recognize, like, okay, and I don't know for you, for myself as an entrepreneur, I feel like I just throw a bunch of spaghetti on the wall, I see what sticks, and I will move forward with that piece, and continue to throw, and then find another piece to move with and stuff like that. Not sure if it's the best way. It's the way. Working
It is a way.
but it's a way. So for yourself, like, how did you translate so well into running a business and entrepreneurship and stuff like that? So how do you use what you learned to be an entrepreneur, and at what point do you pivot and you're like, this isn't working or this is working? Because you found so much success in a specific avenue. At what point did you learn that?
So I had no original aspirations to be an entrepreneur. I saw entrepreneurs as people who had brilliant ideas and they understood business and they had all these resources and experiences and knowledge to be able to go down that. Like, I don't have that. I've never had the desire to be an entrepreneur. I wasn't very entrepreneurial in school or anything. And you hear about these guys that in high school I was making 10 grand a month fixing people's computers or whatever it is. Like,
Yeah.
I never had that idea. And so when I was getting out of the military, I was just looking for a job. Like, what's something that I would enjoy doing that lets me live here in San Diego, gives me purpose, and makes it feel like I'm doing something meaningful while still having the resources and the time to do the other things that I enjoy. Because I recognized pretty early on that I'm not going to be able to replace the SEAL teams. I was fortunate that I started going down the route to apply for HRT within the FBI. So it's their SWAT, super SWAT special forces. And I was most of the way through the interview process as I was getting out of the military. And I just had this moment of clarity, like, I actually don't want to do this. First off, I don't want to go back to Quantico, which is where HRT is located. And I feel like I'm just trying to fill that void that I was going to have leaving the SEAL teams. I just wanted to have that combat related profession. But I figured once I got there, I'd be like, well, it's not the SEAL teams. It's not the same. I don't know if I really want. And so I abandoned that completely. I called them and told them that I didn't want to move forward with joining the FBI anymore. I was just going to find a career that allowed me the time and afforded me the amount of money I needed to do this stuff. I wasn't trying to become some multimillionaire. I just wanted to be able to go surfing, work out, travel, spend time at home with my wife. We were looking to have a family soon. And so those were my priorities. And I knew that pretty early on. And so I got a job as a recruiter, actually. I originally had no intention of being a recruiter. I saw recruiting as HR and HR was Toby from The Office. Like, I don't want to do that. But after talking to some outside recruiters about what they did, like, I have huge amounts of independence and freedom. I choose my own hours as long as you're a organized and hardworking person, you can do really well. I've decided to give that a try. And I was working with a company for about 10 months before I realized this is not for me. Nothing against recruiting. I didn't like working for somebody else where I was giving up 75% or more of the money I was bringing in when I was doing full cycle recruiting. I was bringing on new clients. I was placing candidates. I was negotiating contracts. I was sending invoices, like all these things that you basically do running a business. I didn't feel like I was really getting anything back from the company that I was working at. They didn't have some recognizable name brand that I can drop. Like I couldn't say I was working at Corn Ferry or something like that, where it's a big recruiting agency that they might recognize. And so I was doing my own branding and marketing as it was. So I decided, what? I'm going to give this a whirl. I'm going to try starting my own recruiting agency. And a service-based industry is a great segue into entrepreneurship because there's very little overhead. I already owned a computer, I already owned a cell phone. I don't need an office. All I needed was a little bit of software from LinkedIn Recruiter. I went on Google and PowerPoint, made my own logo. I had a free Gmail that I started with it. I'm like, cool, I'm open for business, like $7,500 a year in total overhead. And that was really my first experience with running a business. And I learned to love it. I'm like, this is a ton of fun. It gives me so much freedom. I love building this stuff up. And it was really just on a whim that I started posting stuff on LinkedIn, talking about entrepreneurship, starting a business, things to consider, and a ton of veterans in my very small network at the time becoming really engaged with the stuff I was posting. And it made me realize that there wasn't a ton out there in terms of resources for veterans to become entrepreneurs. There's 1,001 organizations out there to help veterans get jobs, learn skills, resume prep, interview prep, all those types of things. But if you wanted to be an entrepreneur, there wasn't a lot out there to make you successful. And so I started building something out to help other people have something similar to what I had. I didn't have all the answers. I had a data point one of one with a recruiting agency. There's a ton of other businesses out there, completely different industries, different models, but I could at least talk to the fundamentals of starting a business, getting EIN, incorporating, setting up emails, bank accounts, credit cards, all the basic stuff to give people a roadmap so they have some direction to go with starting their business.
What a road in terms of I'm gonna try this and I'm just gonna it's like you seem to have no fear. You just kind of are like enjoying the
It'll
journey
buff
and
out.
yeah, it'll buff out.
Well, I mean, I looked at it like if it completely fails, I'll get a job. I'm sure I can find a job someplace. I don't need a ton of money. I've been fortunate in that the way I've designed my life, we have a very low cost of living, even though we're in San Diego. I got my house at a good time. I couldn't teach that to somebody else. It was dumb luck. I bought it at a low point that I didn't know was a low point. I refinanced when it was like 2% interest and we had already paid off our car. So like, and now I have medical through the VA. And so things have worked out and I've taken advantage of those, but I live within my means. I don't spend a bunch of stuff superfluously. And so I'm able to take those bigger risks, knowing that if it completely fails, hell, I can go get a job as a bartender and cover my needs. I can work at a coffee shop to make ends meet for a while as I recoup. It's the same thing we talk about in jujitsu, just being comfortable, being uncomfortable. Sometimes it's going to suck, but you work through it's life doesn't have to be as hard as people make it out to be. And yes, I'm a privileged white dude who lives in San Diego. I get it. You can talk shit, but
No.
at some point, there's a lot of stuff out there for a lot of people that if you just have the right mindset, you can do remarkably well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we create most of our problems, right? And I always tell people like I always end up helping people solve their problems because I say I have no problems because I just feel like whatever is going on is just gonna buff it out. Like it's
Yeah.
it. Like it's no one's I always go back to one person that was on the podcast. They said in business it's so much easier because people freak out and he's like, nobody's shooting at us,
Yeah.
and and that's what I always say to myself. I'm always like, nobody is shooting at me right now. Like there is no problem.
The,
No.
the best phrase I heard, he doesn't take credit for it, but I give him credit for it all the time. Kevin Kermes said, if you can solve your problems by throwing money at it, they're not real problems. So
And
like, yeah,
there's this there's this amazing book called Dissolve the Problem. And when you
mhm.
read the book, you realize there are no problems. So I highly recommend that one
Dissolve
and
the problems.
Dissolve the Problem.
Checking
Yeah.
it
And
out.
yeah, highly recommend on Amazon. And so I want to ask you our wrap up question for the show is what do you got for all of our listeners out there to develop that mental toughness, to tap into that untapped potential, to keep on going when failure comes up or obstacles come our way?
I'll quote what Captain Hennessy told us. I think he was the commander at the time. When we finished Tow Week, he said, do something that challenges you every single day. Don't ever get complacent. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. Like it's not you don't have to go full Goggins on this and, run 26 miles in the rain, freezing rain, but just find something that challenges you every day. Do a hard workout, do an ice plunge, go swimming in the ocean. If you're terrified of sharks, like do something that challenges you, scares you, pushes your comfort zone. Because if you're constantly pushing that comfort zone, getting uncomfortable, then when discomfort happens in an unintentional manner, then you'll be much more aware of how you react to it. It's not some new feeling. Like you mentioned your friend, he never experienced failure and then all of a sudden in his late 20s he failed and it was just debilitating for him. If you're used to pushing yourself to the point that you fail or you struggle or you have to think about am I going to quit or do I keep going? Then when life throws curveballs at you, it becomes much less daunting and you can kind of think through it. You're like, I've been through shit before. And that's what I love about having gone through Hell Week. I mean, I'm sure it was terrible for my health. It probably took a couple of years off my life, but it gives you a perspective shift that I made it through this thing. Oh, this financial problem that I'm having, or this relationship problem that I'm having, or my water heater broke and it just flooded all over my garage and I need to get this fixed now. And I don't have the extra cash for it. You're like, okay, well, we'll find a solution for it. I've worked through bigger problems in the past. So having something to continuously shift your perspective on what is actually challenging and what is just inconvenient, but has plenty of options going forward, I think will really help people.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed having you on the show. I
My pleasure.
appreciate you
Thank you.
being here. So everyone that's listening, go listen to Harder Not Smarter because it's a really fantastic podcast. I really enjoy it. I became a fan after meeting you too. So thanks for being here. And everyone that's listening, please like, share, comment, subscribe, become a Patreon member to get access to our bonus episodes. And
Click that like button.
Yeah, hit that like button. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you all next week.